Oh boy. So last week and this time, we've been going through looking at Joshua, tracking him from when he first showed up and met Moses and followed him around and did everything that he was doing. And we didn't know what was going to happen to him. And then God just said, hey, you're going to be the guy in charge. And so Moses dies and Joshua becomes the guy in charge. And they go and they conquer the land. They show up in across the river, if you remember this. And God provides a way for them across in the middle of the flood. And then they beat Jericho, and then they screw up, and so some people die. And then they end up with Ai and the sin of Achan. That's what we covered last week. It's a place that they went to conquer, and one of the people didn't follow the rules, and so he screwed it up for everybody. And so kind of goes with one of our values around here of me and we. So whatever's going on in your life actually affects the people that are around you, and so that's why we try and do life together so that you don't have to do it alone. So anyway, that's just kind of bringing you up to speed on where we're at. If you guys would repeat these or say these, you can still put them up here, but Colossians chapter 3, 16 to 17 are verses that we're memorizing together, and it goes like this. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And let me just kind of remind you why we do that, because when I first started doing this, and we haven't always done it at Discovery. I'm going to have you guys vote in a second, so you can take your phones out for that. But when I first started doing that, it was in a military chapel. And it was a Protestant chapel that they also used as the Catholic chapel. And the way that they did it is they had some icons or statues up in the corner. And when it was the Protestants, they'd hide them. They'd turn it so it was just a flat panel. And when it was Catholic church time, they'd spin it around, and whatever these people were, they'd have Catholic church. And so that's the environment. And so when Laura and I started going to church there, they would pick out a verse. Here's the verse that we're going to do, and they'd memorize it. You'd have it in your little bulletin, and you could say it with them. And you'd just repeat it. And I grew up in Minnesota in a Lutheran church. And so a Lutheran church is kind of one of those things where it's, one guy, ma, and then the rest of you, ma. So it's la, 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 la. And you just repeat, and I could tell you it's page 72. Okay, that's where you would start. And so I didn't think much of it until Laura and I had been out of the military. We lived in Florida or whatever, and suddenly, how do I know these verses? I never studied them in seminary or anything like this. And I started thinking back, and I remembered, I learned those just by So I tell you that because that might be what it feels like for you, but God is going to do something with his word. And so let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. And that's just your encouragement. So if you got your phone, I encourage you to follow along on YouVersion. Also take it out, and there's a few questions if you haven't already. So this is up here. All you have to do is go to menti.com, and you can use the code 747942. There's a link also in your YouVersion. And a couple questions for you. Okay? Question number 1. When I need to do something, but I'm really struggling. In other words, you're just kind of getting frustrated. You're trying to accomplish something, and it's not working out the way that you want. You're just kind of tired of trying. It's just like you've given it multiple attempts or whatever. What do you usually find yourself doing? Do you get frustrated? Do you ask for help? Do you try harder? Or do you go and try and figure it out by going to Google and YouTube and say, hey, somebody show me how to do this? I didn't give you that option. I only give you one option. Okay? Yes. You guys, if you want to be entertained, okay, if this is what your elders deal with in their spiritual maturity, talk to Josh afterwards about trying to figure out how to make stars for nursery, okay? That's all you need to know. Next question was, people who know me, okay, so this isn't what you would say. This is what people who know you would say. People who know me would say that I am most likely to just do it myself or to ask for help? Okay? So what do the people who know you, what would they say? Like if Ralph was here, what would you say? Do it yourself. Yes, exactly. So we know this. It doesn't matter what Ralph thinks. It's just what the people who know you think. And then the last question, I'm not going to give you any more insight into this. It's just, what is, okay, and this is a short answer form, and I don't know who answers these or what you say, but what is the power of God? What do you think the power of God is? And just type in your answer and let us know what you think the power of God is. Well, you guys are doing that. I'm going to go look and see what kind of answers you've come up with. And how the people who are extremely frustrated that they only could choose one have responded. So, let's see. When I need to do something but I'm really struggling, the winner for this one, at least out of this group in this room, is you people get frustrated. Okay? You people just, you get frustrated. Now, there are some of it's pretty much even across the rest of them. Okay? So that's the high winner, and then it's ask for help, try harder, and Google and YouTube, which kind of makes sense with you guys who want to say all of the above. People who know me would say I'm most likely to, by an overwhelming margin, do it yourself. There are literally only 3 people here who most people would say that they will ask for help. Okay, that's good to know. I ask you this because of what we're going to be talking about. And the power of God is, see what you guys have come up with, the force and creation behind everything. I love this. There's 2 answers. One says anything and one says everything. It's everything given to us through the Holy Spirit. It's the display of God's work in the world, the ability to heal or not heal according to His will, something that moves people spiritually. I like this one. The power. What is the power of God? Indescribable. All-powerful and knowing. It's answering prayers and doing miracles and only God can do. There's no explanation. Just read one more here. It's to show us, I'll read 2 more since somebody else just sent one in. To show us if you always do it yourself and are not letting Him lead, and if you don't ask, that you're trying to control. Let go and ask for help. When I do my best and then God does the rest, in a way, that is remarkable beyond any of my best efforts. Okay, so we'll just leave that. There's more there. So that gives me an idea of kind of where we're at. And so what I want you to do is I want you to write down just kind of the overarching idea here for today. That's not moving, huh? Let's give it a shot. Try it again. Okay. Go. There we go. All right. So just to kind of keep you up, we're going to be in Joshua still. We ended in chapter 8. We're going to skip chapter 9, so just to give you kind of a really short version. They just beat Jericho. They beat Ai after fixing things because the guy screwed it up for them. And then they're about to go and conquer the entire land, and they're about to take care of everybody. And by take care of everybody, I mean kill them. Okay? Because that's what God had them do. We'll explain that in a minute. However, there were these tricky people called the Gibeonites. And these tricky people, the Gibeonites, in chapter 9, they came and they acted like they had old bread and old clothes, and like, we've come from a very long way. Will you make a peace with us and a covenant with us that you won't destroy us? And the Israelites and Joshua, they didn't inquire of God, and so they said, sure, it's a deal, okay? You guys come from a long way. Your bread it was warm when you left, and now it's a rock. Like, yeah, we'll do that. And then they come to find out that the Gibeonites are neighbors, okay? And so that's not a good thing when you're also a neighbor. Because when you find out that the people who are supposed to be your buddy have made peace with the people who are coming to kill you because they heard about the fact that they came across the river. They heard about the fact that they had taken out Jericho. They heard about the fact that they had taken out Ai. And people are scared. And when you find out that your neighbors have made peace with them, all of a sudden you realize they're not on your team anymore. So what do? Well, in the beginning of chapter 10, what they do is they say, hey, we need to round up a few of our folks, and we're going to go attack those little suckers who made a deal with the enemy. And that's kind of where it's going to start. And Joshua and the Israelites, they're only making a deal with one person. Everybody know who that is? Very good. I was hoping somebody would say it, because it's one of those easy answers. Like when somebody asks a question in church and you don't know, it's either God or Jesus. Okay? That's usually what the answer is. You've heard that story before, right? About the pastor who was doing a children's church message, and he brought the kids up, and he started asking them questions, and he started saying, what is gray, and it has 4 legs, and it's got a bushy tail, and nobody's raising their hand. He goes, and it eats acorns, climbs trees. Nobody's saying, he says, do you guys not know what this is? And this little boy goes, I know the answer is Jesus, but it sounds an awful lot like a squirrel. Okay, so anyway, I gave you the easy answer, okay? The answer is God. The Israelites and Joshua partnered with God. And I'm telling you that because if you get nothing out of this today, for all of you do-it-yourselfers, for all of you who are, I'll do it myself. I can take care of this. I am self-sufficient. For all of you do-it-yourselfers, write this down. The Lord's power, God's power, is only shared with his partners. And so if you're going to function in a way that works against the partnership of God, and you do it your own way, I do it myself kind of thing, then you'll miss out a lot of times on his power. The Israelites didn't because they partnered with the Lord, and the Lord's power was shared with those people who partnered with him. I say that because, do any of you know who, have you ever heard of William Wilberforce? Okay, some of you have, some of you hasn't. Back in the 1800s, he was in England, and William Wilberforce is a person who is known as an abolitionist, somebody who was anti-slavery, okay? And he wanted to get rid of the slave trade. He didn't care to begin with because he wasn't a believer, but once he became a believer, he's like, I need to do something. And John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, wrote a letter of encouragement from his deathbed to William Wilberforce. And here's what he wrote, okay? William Wilberforce was fighting for years to stop the slave trade and better treatment of slaves. It took decades. But here's what John Wesley wrote to him. Unless the divine power has raised you up, I see not how you can go through your glorious enterprise in opposing that abominable practice of slavery, which is the scandal of religion, of England, and of human nature. Unless God has raised you up for this very thing, you will be worn out by the opposition of men and devils. But if God be for you, who can be against you? Are all of them together stronger than God? Go on in the name of God and in the power of his might. Now, you might not think much of that. It doesn't really resonate with you. But when I read that, I think of somebody who recognizes something. That the Lord's power is really only shared with people who are partnering with him. And William Wilberforce was somebody who said, you know what? I want to do whatever God has called me to do. I want to serve the people that God has put me in the power to have some kind of influence on. And so I'm going to do that. And John Wesley recognized it and said, go and serve. If the power of God has called you, then the power of God will provide you. That's what we're going to be talking about as we get in here to Joshua chapter 10. So I've caught you up on chapter 9. The Gibeonites, neighbors, they made a deal with them, and all the rest of the neighbors were not happy about that. And so they got 5 different kings together. If you read in the beginning of chapter 10, I didn't put it in your notes, but you can go read this on your own. And in chapter 10, 5 different kings came together and said, hey, look, one of our buddies here, they betrayed us. We need to go and take them out. And so they all assembled together, and they're going to attack Gibeah. Well, Gibeah's made a deal with Joshua and the Israelites, and so they send somebody to go and say, hey, remember, we're friends. Can you come help? And even though Joshua shouldn't have made a covenant, even though they really should have destroyed him, Joshua's a man of his word. And so what does he do? He goes to help. And this is where we're going to pick up. So in Joshua chapter 10, verse 6 is where they sent a message, and then verse 8. The Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came on them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. So basically, he's coming, and I believe it was about 30 miles, if I remember when I checked this out earlier. So the place where they crossed the river, that was Gilgal. That's where they all got circumcised. That's where they kind of based out of. And they were there, and they marched all night. Okay, so they did whatever they do all day, and then they marched all night, about 30 miles, to Gibeah. And verse 10, and the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them away to the ascent of Beth-horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth-horon, the Lord threw down huge or large stones from heaven. He threw them on them as far as Azekah and Beth-horon. The Lord threw down large stones, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. Okay. And then at that time Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said, hey, when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel, he said, in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still. And this is that little story where the sun actually stood still. Moon in the valley. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. And it says, is it not written in the book of Jashar, the sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry about for a whole day. I don't know how you explain that other than the power of God is only shared with those who partner with God. And then there has been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded the voice of man. And then these last few words, for the Lord fought for Israel. The Lord fought for Israel. Now, maybe you're tired. Maybe you're dealing with stuff and you're just worn out from going through the same thing again and again. You just seem to, like even Justin. You know, Justin's been sick. His family's been sick. He called Tyler this morning. Actually, Tori called Tyler this morning and say, hey, I am not feeling well. I have no voice. I can't sing. And Tyler thought that Justin wasn't going to be here. And then, so when Justin came in, he surprised me. But this has been going on for months. Like, they just can't seem to beat it. What do you do when you're just tired? And I'm looking at our medical friends here. Kayla's back there. Hunter and Amber are back. And I've learned so much about what it's like to be a doctor, because these are the people who, when you're a medical student or you're in residency, you go and you work for like 80 hours or more, and then in your free time, because there's 168 hours in a week, okay? So in your free time, they don't ask you to sleep. They ask you to study because you're going to have exams or boards coming up. And then they ask you to chart, because you might not get it all done in the 12 or 14 hours that you were doing at work. And then you have to do notes so that the people who come behind you know what you charted on and all that kind of stuff. And then, not only that, you're supposed to read because there's continuing education. And you might have to do some kind of presentation, and so you're going to have to put some stuff together. Am I getting it right? Yes. Okay. And then there's projects and team things and research. Cool, right? And that's on top of the 80 hours. So what do you do if you're like a med person? If you're a resident? You just try and survive, right? Well, if you partner with the Lord will share his power with you. Because the Lord has the power to, like you see up there, overcome. The Lord has the power to overcome. And you look in verse 14. The Lord fought for Israel. Okay, well, how did he do that? See, Joshua listened to him. He said, hey, go up, fight. I've given them into your hand. You're going to be fine. Don't be afraid. And so he goes up, and they march all night. And how did Joshua overcome? He didn't really do anything. He just showed up. And then the Lord's power made them all kind of crazy. What did it say? They came up after marching all night, and then in verse 10, the Lord threw them into a panic. So all the people who are there and assembled to fight are suddenly panicking, and they're fighting each other. That's not enough. I mean, that doesn't necessarily beat them. So Israel at least has a leg up because these guys don't have a clue what's going on. But the people all start running away. Well, they haven't beat them, they've just scared them. So what does God do? He continues to partner with them, and what does it say? I believe it's verse 11. They fled before Israel, and while they were going down, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven, and they died. There were more men who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. So again, we see Joshua's coming up. He says, don't be afraid. You're going to beat all 5 kings with just your measly little one, army. You're just a bunch of wandering invaders. You've never been here before. You used to be wandering in the desert for 40 years. And you're just suddenly going to show up and take over a bunch of towns? Oh, yeah. But because you're partnered with me. And so the power of God is there for us to overcome whatever you're up against. Because God's power is only shared with his partners. So my question as we go on here is, are you actually a partner with the Lord? Are you actually a partner? Because when it comes to salvation, when it comes to things like heaven, when it comes to living the abundant life, we try to do it on our own. We try to make sure we earn enough money. We try and make sure that we have a good reputation. We try to make sure that we have peace and comfort and all those kinds of things. And there's nothing wrong with that. But those who partner with God will receive the power of God for that peace and that contentment and all of those kinds of things. And Jesus did that. He overcame death and the grave because the power of God was in him. And so, are you partnered with Jesus? And this is hard because I start filtering things through my own experience. And I go, you know what? I don't know if I am sometimes. And I'm just being honest. Like sometimes, I don't feel like I'm experiencing this. Why? As I've reflected on it, I start realizing it's because I'm not partnered with God. I'm trying to figure it out on my own. And when you partner with him, sometimes all you need to do is show up. That's what happened with Joshua. Just show up. March all night, show up. Boom, God took care of it. More guys died because of hail falling from the sky than they were able to kill with the sword. Because the Lord fought for Israel. So the Lord is able to overcome when you are tired, when you are struggling, when you're overwhelmed, when it's just like you've been marching all night, you've been going after this for so long, and you don't know, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just supposed to be here. That's when the Lord will overcome. You just show up. So they defeat these 5 kings. That's a pretty good start. They've defeated Jericho. They've defeated Ai. They've defeated these 5 kings. And then they're going to, and just so you know, you can go ahead and read through this. They actually, if you're one of those people who likes the gore in the Bible, like the truth of what happens. Like the kings, they locked in a cave, and then they came back and took the stone away from the cave, and then they killed the kings, and they hung them on a post, and then they put them back in the cave. Yeah, you can go read that. It's in there. It would make a great movie. But what happens after that is okay, we're on a roll. We're going to take this land. And they're about to take out all the southern kingdoms. And then they're going to take out all the northern kingdoms that are in this land. So let me just read this for you. In Joshua chapter 10, I'm just going to read a few verses. In Joshua chapter 10, starting in verse 29, okay, this is just the beginning of the taking of the southern part of Canaan. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him, they passed on from Makkedah and Libnah, and they fought against Libnah. And verse 30, and the Lord gave it. He gave it also and its king into the hands of Israel, and he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, and he left none remaining. And he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. You go to verse 31. Then Joshua and all of Israel with him passed on from Libnah to Lachish, and they laid siege to it, and they fought against it. What's verse 32? And the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel. And he captured it on the second day, and he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. And you just go down, and you just read through the rest of this chapter. They went to this place, and this place, and this place, and this place, and they beat them, they beat them, they beat them. They just destroyed them. They beat everybody because the Lord gave them. And then, okay, well, that's great. We got the southern part. What about all these people up north? So he decides they're going to go up north. And in chapter 11, we'll just start in verse 5. All these kings, they just listed off a whole bunch of them, they joined forces and they came in and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel, okay? So we've been here before. They've just beat a whole bunch of people. Now there's a bunch of kings up in the north, and they want to fight against Israel. In verse 6, the Lord said to Joshua, don't be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I'll give them all over to you, slain, to Israel. You're going to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. And so Joshua and all his warriors, they came suddenly against them by the waters of Merom, and they fell upon them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel, who struck them and chased them as far as Great Sidon and Mishra, I can't even pronounce that, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpeh. And they struck them until they left none remaining. And Joshua did to them as the Lord said to him. And he hamstrung their horses, and he burned their chariots with fire. Just a little bit more here. And Joshua turned back at that time, and he captured Hazor, and he struck its king with the sword, for Hazor was formerly the head of all the kingdoms. And they struck with the sword all who were in it, devoting them to destruction. You heard that before? You heard that last week, devoting them to destruction? We'll come back to that. There was none left that breathed, and he burned Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings, and all their kings Joshua captured. And he struck them with the edge of the sword, devoting them to instruction, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But none of the cities that stood on mounds did Israel burn, except Hazor alone. That Joshua burned. Okay. So, what we see here is that Joshua and the Israelites, okay, they're just one little band of people. And they're going to fight against all these kings that are coming together and saying, hey, like, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but when I was in high school, occasionally you'd see a fight start, and a lot of times it would be out in the parking lot. And in Minnesota in the 80s, when I was in high school, because I graduated in the 90s, what people would do is they'd park their cars or their trucks in a circle, and then everybody would pile in the circle, and then people fighting would be inside the throng of people inside the parked vehicles in the parking lot of the school. Okay? Like really sneaky, right? Nobody will know. But a lot of times nobody said anything because it's not like we had cell phones. Nobody was Snapchatting it or Instagramming it or that wasn't happening. And so the administrators, they didn't know because it's not like you could hear this big throng of people from the other end of the school. So there'd be this fight going. And I remember one particular time, I don't even remember who it was. I don't remember what grade I was, but there was this fight going. And these two guys were going at it. Over what? Who knows? I just know it's kind of fun because you want to go and watch a fight. I mean, I'll just admit it. That's what you do. But then this one kid kind of cheated, I guess. He fought dirty. He hit him in the uh-ohs. And so the guy who just got hit in the whoopsies had some friends there. He's like, that's not fair. And so instead of just two guys fighting, now it's like four guys fighting one guy who kicks. Yeah. So imagine, this is kind of what's going on. Like, okay, so here's Israel. You want to win a fight. You might need some help. But you're going to do anything you can to win this fight. And you tick off some people. You do something that you really maybe shouldn't do. Well, if that happens, then everybody else who's around goes, oh, no, this is not how you fight. And they're going to make it 3, 4, 5, 6 on 1. That's what's going on. And so, as all of these kings are coming together and all of these kingdoms are coming together and they're fighting against Israel, they are in desperate need of some help. Desperate need of some help. Well, if they're going to possess this land, they need to beat every single one of these guys. They need to beat up that one and that one and that one and that one and all you too. What do they need? They need some help. And those who partner with God are the ones who can receive the power of God. Well, remember, Joshua and Israel are partners with God. And so the Lord has the power to do exactly what they need, to provide exactly what they needed. He gave them to them. You read in chapter 10, he gave over these people. It's chapter 10, verse 30. The Lord gave it and its king to the hand of Israel. Verse 32, the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel. Like, this is something that God is providing. He's like, you don't have to do it. I'm just going to give it to you. And so, if God has promised, this isn't one of your blanks, but you might want to write it down. If God has promised you something, then it's pretty good guess that he's going to provide. If God has promised, He will provide. I'll give you an example. One of the verses that Laura and I memorized, we taught, I think it was middle school, when we were at that Protestant chapel with the, icons that would turn around. Okay, we taught the middle school kids, and we wanted to help them memorize a verse. And it was this verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. And it says this: no temptation has seized you. Should I do the actions that helped them remember? No temptation has seized you, except what's common to man. But God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. And we didn't do that. We did this. Bear. But He will provide a way out for you so you can stand up against it. See, you wanted to be in my class, didn't you? No temptation has seized you, except what's common to man. But God is faithful. Why? Well, because the Lord has the power to provide, and He'll provide a way out when you're tempted so that you can stand up underneath it. God will provide whatever it is that you need, and it's the power of God that will provide those things. And so if it's the promise of God, and God had promised them, I've given you this land, right? He'd promised them, then God's probably going to provide. So for us here who sit around and we go, I don't know if I can really trust God with this or that thing in my life. I don't know if He'll really do what He said He'll do. I don't know if I should handle my finances this way when God has told me to. Or I don't know if I should honor my friends and relationship, or I should protect my mind, or I should be careful what I say, or if I should stay married, or if I should whatever. I don't know if I should do that. Well, if God has promised you something, then He'll probably provide it. However, we have this tendency to want to do things on our own. And so I want you to look at chapter 11, verse 12. Verse 12. No, it's a good verse. I promise, baby. It's a good verse. Chapter 11, verse 12. All the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua captured, and he struck them with the edge of the sword, devoting them to destruction, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. Now, we talked last week about that devotion to destruction. That part where you literally, God has said, I want you to get rid of them completely because I am the only one to be worshipped, because this is pollution and you need to clean it up. Okay? And that's what God is looking like when He says, this is your land, it's dirty and messy because there's a whole bunch of sin there, and the sin is taking place in all of these people groups that worship other gods and come against God Himself. And so He says, devote them to destruction. Purify them. Get rid of them. Well, Joshua is doing this, but in verse 12, what's he saying? They devoted them to destruction, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. So, if God will provide when He's promised something, you can pretty much guess that God won't provide if we're not going to keep His promise. If we're going to try and do something on our own. So, can I just maybe show you something? If you have your Bible, back up a little bit, and if you're following along in YouVersion, I think I put it in there. Deuteronomy chapter 20. Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 13. Here's what he says. This is Moses talking to the people of God, because Joshua's doing just as Moses commanded. Deuteronomy 20, 13. And when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, when the God provides you, you shall put all its males to the sword. But the women and the little ones, the livestock and everything else in the city, all its spoils, you shall take as plunder for yourselves. You shall enjoy the spoil of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here, but in the cities of these people, which the Lord your God is giving you for your inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods. And so you sin against the Lord your God. So before Joshua even shows up, he's been told, here's the plan. The promise is this is your land. The provision is I'll make sure that they're gone. Your part in keeping the promise is to devote them to destruction so that there's nothing left breathing. You want to know why Joshua was provided for, why Israel was taken care of? The power of God was at work because they kept the promise of God. Because they partnered with God. So, sometimes we think that we can just opt out. Again, as we're those kind of people. I'll do it myself. I got a better way. Okay? Any of you ever have arguments about toilet seat up or down, toilet paper over or under, cap on the toothpaste or off? You put these things in the hamper or just on the floor? Apparently, some people have connected with some of these things. Okay, these are differences. I'm not even getting into it. I'm not going to claim that there's a right or a wrong. I will, but not from here. I'm not going there. I'm not going there. Okay? What I'm bringing that up for is because there is a way that God has said we should do things. We don't get to choose differently. And when God says, do this and this will happen, choose for yourself this and then I'll give you blessing, but if you don't do this, then I'll give you curses, that's just what's going to happen. And sometimes we forget that. So I heard this story, and I wrote it down. There's a guy who was teaching. He came to visit a group, and he was just doing a little Bible study or something. And he read Matthew 28:20, which says, hey, I'm with you all. This is Jesus talking the very end. Lo, I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age. And then he looks at the people that he's teaching. He goes, isn't that a great promise? I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Isn't that a great promise? And some little old lady who's there goes, that's not a promise, young man. That's a fact. That's what I'm talking about. If God has promised it, you can count it as done. When he says, hey, look, I will give eternal life to anyone who calls on the name of the Lord, and you will be saved. That's a promise, but that promise also means that it's a fact. Because God's promises will happen. So what is the promise for us? Okay, hopefully you guys aren't fighting your neighbors. And if you are, you're not on the wanted list for killing them. So how does this apply to us? Well, there's a promise that we have. The promise is the promise of eternal life. They had the promise of an inheritance, of a land that was theirs. We have the promise of eternal life. We need somebody to provide that for us. God provided it by just giving them over to him. Gave them these people, they just destroyed them all. Okay, well, how has he provided eternal life for us? He gave us Jesus. That's the provision. Well, what's the plan? That's the plan. That's the plan. Here, guys. Partners need to stick to the plan. If we're going to partner with God and receive the power of God and see the power of God at work, you need to stick to the plan. Joshua and Israelites saw that because they stuck to the plan. When you go into the land, wipe them out. Don't leave anything alive. I'm giving you the land. And he did. Well, here's the plan for us. The promise is eternal life, the provision is Jesus, and the plan is trust Jesus. You don't get to make another plan. You don't get to say, well, I'm a really good person. I go to church. I pray. I memorized scripture or whatever. That doesn't matter. That's not the plan. And if you try and do that and only that, but don't trust in Jesus Christ, you haven't followed the plan and you will not receive the power of God. It's as simple as that. We get to the end of chapter 12 here. And they've been fighting for a long time. They go, it goes this place, this king. They beat him, they destroyed him, they cut him, all that kind of, it's just read through the whole thing. And you get to the end of chapter 11. And let's see, we'll start in verse 18. Joshua made war a long time with all of those kings. Okay, so this wasn't just an overnight deal. There was war, and it went on for a long time. There was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. They took them all in battle. For it was the Lord's doing to harden the hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destruction and should receive no mercy but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded them. Okay, so what God's doing is making people not like them so that they can be destroyed. I want you to pick up on that, because there's going to be people that don't like us. It might even be the doing of God. We'll get to that in a second. Verse 21, Then Joshua came at the end of that time, and he cut off all the Anakim from the hill country, and from Hebron, and Debir, and Anab, and from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. And Joshua devoted them to destruction with their cities. There was none left of Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod did some remain. And so Joshua took the whole land, according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel, according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. So they were fighting for a long time, and then the land had rest from war. Now, I'm sure that they wanted to just, get in and be able to move into their land, but they couldn't. Does anybody know what this place is? Whoops, sorry, here's your blank. The Lord has the power to bring peace, but let me give you a picture here. Does anybody know what this place is? It was owned by a woman named Sarah Winchester. Does that help? Okay, it's called the Winchester House. Okay, it's in San Jose, California. And Sarah Winchester was the wife of, I don't know what his first name was, but the guy who started Winchester Arms. Okay, so the guns. And so when he died, she became a multi-millionaire. And this is back in like 1884, where she would receive basically like $1,000 a day. That's how much they were bringing in for her, which in our money would be about $25,000 a day. Okay, so she had an unlimited amount of money, basically. And this was her house. And the story goes that she continued building from 1884 until she died in 1922. And she continued to add on to it. Just here's another view, okay? It's a big house, okay? But you don't really understand how big this house is. This house is well over 24,000 square feet. It has 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 40 staircases. Some of those staircases lead to nowhere. They literally lead into the ceiling. No. They had 9 kitchens. They have windows that if you literally open them up, you'll fall out of the house. They're doors, like French doors, out to the ground. You will die. Okay, same thing inside the house. Now, why did they do this? The story goes like this, that Sarah Winchester thought that her home was haunted by ghosts of people who had been killed by weapons made by her husband. And that the only way to keep them at bay was to continually build. And so for 38 years, they were building, trying to keep her from being haunted. That's why she had the house built so that stairways lead to nowhere. Windows lead to other places to confuse the spirits that were supposedly haunting that house. She wanted to find some kind of peace. And so for 20-some years, 38 years, for 38 years, she continually added and built to this house. Freaky, right? When I found out about this, I'm like, we got to go to San Jose. As a matter of fact, there's 160 rooms, but then I found an article as I'm reading about them, I'm trying to find, there's 161. They found an attic space that apparently when there was an earthquake, she got locked into, and so she closed it off so nobody could go there, but they found room 161.
But do you know the way to San Jose?
Yeah, I don't. Go west. Yes, that's good. So can you imagine living in that kind of environment, thinking that there's just literally no way you can rest, that 24 hours a day for 38 years you are pouring money into a house, making it bigger and bigger and bigger, 10,000 windows. That would be a full-time job just to wash them. But she could not find peace. How does that happen? Well, the Lord has the power to bring peace because the Lord is the one who can provide. The Lord is the one who can overcome. And the Lord is the one who, what does it say at the very end? And the land had rest from war. How? Well, because God had done all the work ahead of time. God had led Joshua there. He had given over these people. He had provided for them. He'd overcome it. Like God had done it all. But again, we're not fighting our neighbors. We're not having battles. We're not, but maybe you've been struggling with something for a mighty long time. Maybe it's an addiction or some kind of hang-up or something that you keep finding yourself falling into. Maybe it's relationships and they're not working out the way you want them, or you're just constantly bickering with somebody that you really should be getting along with. I don't know what it is. Maybe you go from job to job or you don't have a job. You just want a job. What do? Well, you partner with God because it's only the partners of God that receive the power of God. And he talked about that. Jesus did in Matthew chapter 11. In Matthew chapter 11, 28 to 30, he says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and you're heavy laden. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So Jesus is saying, come and partner with me. A yoke is something that would go across two animals to pull something, and they work together. Partner with me. But I like the way, and I put this in your U version, I like the way it says it in the Message. Here's how it says those verses. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And so if the Lord has the power to bring peace, Jesus is the one who will bring peace to us when we partner with him. So, just to kind of summarize the blanks that are on your notes there, the Lord's power, whatever power you need, power to make it through this day, power to get to this next event, power to hold on a little bit longer, the Lord's power is only shared with those who partner with him, which means you can't do it on your own. The Lord will help you overcome because he has the power to overcome. The Lord will provide whatever it is you or I need because he has the power to provide. And the Lord will bring peace because he has the power to bring peace. But it's only when we stick with his plan. That's how it works. And so I would strongly encourage you, I would simply ask, do you or have you partnered with Jesus? Have you partnered with the Lord so that you can have overcoming faith, where God can provide for you in ways that it just doesn't make sense? Like, I still think, and it was only just a few weeks ago, like Ralph's going to Peru because the Lord provided. It was definitely the Lord's power because there's no reason that somebody would show up with, $1,800 in cash to church. And then just decide, give this to him. Like, let me just make sure I'm not making a false assumption. Do any of you here have more than 5 $100 bills on your person or in your vehicle? Okay. And that's not even 25% of what somebody had here and gave away. Like that is the power and provision of God. And we only get that when we partner with God.